Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Lurkey. We're at the beginning of an historic shift in Minnesota, and we begin with state demographer Susan Brower to examine demographics and statistical data relating to populations and the shifting makeup of Minnesota. The baby boomers, those born between the years 1946 to 1964, continue to be an extraordinary force shaping American culture and policy. The oldest members of the baby boom cohort began reaching retirement age in 2011, and the group's shift out of the workforce is one significant change affecting the future of Minnesota.
The change that we are anticipating is one that is unprecedented in our state's history. The growth of the baby boomers will go from about 600,000 in 2010 to about 1.2 million in 2030, so it's really compressed into those years, and it will cause a number of shifts and pressures on a number of different kinds of policies and programs and perhaps budget pressures, and it will also impact labor force growth as the baby boomers move out of the workforce.
Minnesota has a strong tradition of providing a high quality of life for its citizens, and its two largest budget expenditures fall in the categories of education and health and human services. Understanding how the changing demographics will impact the state's budget is imperative.
You know, if we look out another decade or two, that's when the baby boomers will be moving into the older ages, and then we'll begin to think about health care and long-term care and those kinds of things. Right now, when we look at the way that we fund long-term care, so that's part of medical assistance or MA here in Minnesota, these are the services that people use that aren't covered by health insurance. They're usually related to activities of daily living and less kind of medical expenses. Oftentimes those are paid out of public funds after either because people don't have the money to pay for them themselves, or because they have to spend down so that they become eligible.
The shift to an older population will significantly impact Minnesota's economy. One area of concern is whether there will be enough qualified workers to fill the positions vacated by the baby boom generation.
The size and the growth of the labor force is something that we're watching very carefully because it's kind of the other side of this aging trend. We do project that the labor force will continue to grow. When you look at everyone ages 16 plus, will still continue to grow into the future. The growth will just be very, very slow. So we're getting to a pretty critical point where we are close to full employment in a lot of places across the state right now, and we still anticipate a number of retirements coming up with not a lot of people kind of filling the place of those retiring.
And this concern for sufficient qualified workers for a healthy economy dovetails with recent findings concerning racial and economic equity in Minnesota. In January, the Minnesota State Demographic Center issued a report on the economic status of Minnesotans.
One of the things that I wanted to convey in that report, and also in other work that we do, is that the growth in Minnesota is largely coming from populations of color. That happens through births, and that also happens through migration. And so I want people to understand that our younger generation are more racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse than the folks who are leaving the workforce, the older Minnesotans that we have. So looking specifically at, say, Somali Minnesotans or Hmong Minnesotans, you're able to get a better sense of how that community is doing. And we saw that many populations of color that have been in the U.S. for many generations are really not faring well on a number of different kinds of indicators, such as income, labor force participation.
To further illustrate the impact of these demographic changes, the demographer's report notes that by 2020, more than 1/3 of workers aged 20 to 64 will be persons of color in the 7-county Twin Cities metro area. But significant change is also happening in rural Minnesota, and the nature of the changes and the challenges faced vary by region.
Many of our rural communities are already experiencing kind of the pressures from aging right now. They don't need to wait another 10 or 15 years because they've experienced the loss of the younger generation, many communities, because of migration to metropolitan areas. They're feeling it in terms of finding the workforce that they need to staff their care facilities. We hear from around the state that that's happening already.
Both rural and urban aging populations have specialized needs for transportation, and whether it's senior citizens or the population in general, the types of transportation and the funding mechanisms for transportation have become divisive political issues.
The aging trend in general is going to kind of bring all those issues to the fore. In rural areas where you don't have that density, it's going to be really tricky to be able to find a way to transport individuals, and I think that's going to be one of the major programmatic or policy issues facing rural areas in the state and facing greater Minnesota.